Harry, good to see you again, my friend.
Yeah. Nice,
Um,
nice to be here.
I'm sorry I'm slightly late to today's recording. For those that obviously listening to this audio won't be aware, I'm 15 minutes late to our agreed time. I have to be honest, I've just been doing a podcast on, I won't give the guest away, but another show. I have two other podcast shows, and one of them features leaders that influence the HR space. And it was actually all about intrinsic motivation. But if
Yeah.
I'm honest, it was one of those shows. It's been about an hour long and it's the end of the day. And I was struggling a little bit for motivation myself to get through it with the irony. You couldn't make it up, but it's one of those things. A lot of things going on in my mind. I very nearly pulled out of doing today's recording. So thank you, firstly, for still being there 15 minutes later, which is good. And
That's good. Yeah, I was,
thank you
I
for your
was
patience.
teetering. I was teetering on like I've got a lot of work to do for my day, and I was like, shall I get started? And then he'll join about 10 minutes later, and then I'll be like in the mix of things, or shall I just hold off for a bit? So I was just tidying up a few emails, but it was interesting, like you said, that you're talking about intrinsic motivation because it was. I did have quite a few excuses not to do this tonight, and I said I had a really long day. And then, as we mentioned before, my dad was rushed into hospital last night, and it was all a bit of a stress and a panic. And he's still there now, and I've just come from there. And we won't go into too much on the podcast about the condition as such, but it was a bit of a shock for the family, a little bit, and he's on oxygen now because his oxygen was really low. And I think he's got some sort of virus. But anyway, so we've been quite stressed and worried, and then obviously my mum by herself doing things. And so I was thinking, you know what I really wanted to do tonight, if I'm honest, is because I've got like 2 more training days tomorrow, and every training day I do, I have about an hour's worth of feedback that I have to do after that. And I have to do that within 48 to 72 hours of delivering that workshop for various reasons. And if you don't do it one night, it builds to the next, and then it'll be 2 hours, and then it'll be 3 hours. And by Thursday morning, I'll have 3 hours to do. And so really what I wanted to do was just bash out the feedback, chop up which I've done actually, chop up all my vegetables for tomorrow because I need to leave by 7 or 6:30 tomorrow morning. So I chopped up all my veg so I can make a smoothie for myself and my dad and my mum and some juices because they're obviously having hospital food. So all I wanted to do is get that ready, get my bag ready, get into bed, and not get into bed, have a bath and get to bed. And I thought, you know what? I said I was going to do this, and because I said I am going to do it because you're only as good as your word. And yeah, there's always going to be some reason why not to do something, and sometimes it's valid, right? And it is valid today as well. But I just thought, you know what? I committed to this, and I keep saying this to the students that I teach, right? And you might have heard this, Nick, but there's a phrase in Zen Buddhism called how you do anything is how you do everything, or how you do one thing is how you do everything. So really what that means is how you show up in one area of your life is reflective of how you show up in other areas. So if you're not being honest, or you're not being committed here, where else are you not being honest, or where else are you not being committed? Because it's typically reflective. And I just thought, you know what? I actually do pride myself, and a lot of my friends will say that I'm quite dependable, and if I'm going to say I'm going to turn up at a certain place, people expect me to turn up, right? They don't expect me to be 15 minutes. Well, sorry, 15 minutes. No,
I'm very thankful you have turned up. I mean, if going by that Zen Buddhist thing, a couple of things I'm going to bring to life for the listeners here who may not know me as well as yet, but hopefully I'll get to know both of us during the episodes that we release. First is I am late to a lot of things. I have the best of intentions and I overcommit to so many things. But what happens is my day gets behind and I'm constantly chasing. So first thing is thank you for still being online 15 minutes later. Fortunately, you know me well enough to say that I would have contacted you if I wasn't going to turn up. So therefore, you know me well enough to go, something must have happened. It will show. And lo and behold, the previous podcast overran and I didn't want to let this one down. I didn't want to let you down. I've been frantically trying to get to this show and I'm really pleased that I have. But interestingly as well, as you say, you've had loads of reasons you could have cancelled on me today and all of them would have been valid. If you dropped me a message with Nick, you know what? I need to be, my head's not in the game, got my dad to think about. And I'm really pleased you have stayed on, Harry, because, funny how things, coincidences work, and then the big world word works in mysterious ways. Sadly, my dad also was rushed into hospital earlier this week. My dad has stage 4 cancer, but what we didn't expect was them to find tumours on 3 of his vertebrae. End up going by ambulance to Southampton Hospital. where he's had emergency radiotherapy. There was concerns it may have put some pressure on his spinal cord and things like that, and been a bit of a traumatic time for our family as well. So it's interesting how these things, I don't know if you believe in things that happen in threes or whatever, these little things that happen in the world, right? But we're both here on a show. We're both dealing with personal issues in our family lives with loved ones. And maybe this is the most pertinent time to be recording a show like this, because we're talking about the mind in this show. We're talking about the power of thoughts, the ability to be productive against, with other circumstances. And we all know, no matter who's listening to this, wherever you may be in the world, at some point in our lives, people will suffer some kind of level of trauma. And it's how we get through that trauma, how we get through the doubts, the thoughts, the anxieties, the pressures, the thoughts that pop into our head at any moment. And we know, bosses will be looking at us going, we should be working now, we should be doing this. But sometimes our minds are led astray by external factors, and we are human beings, right? We're not robots, so we do have emotions, and we have to contain those, and we want to be there for our families, and we want to be committed individuals. And it's been an interesting week, but
it's really tough because even this morning I was speaking to one of my colleagues. So I was working in a school today and doing a bunch of training, and there was 6 of us trainers there, and I spoke to one of the trainers who was outside, and she's losing her voice, right, which is a bit of a problem for what we do. And so she was thinking about cancelling, but she didn't want to cancel because it means that her group would then have to be distributed amongst all of our groups. And I said to her, look, I was thinking of cancelling at one point because I just wanted to go to the hospital and see my dad, but I didn't want to obviously put that burden on the other trainers as well. I mean, I had to do that last year when I got COVID at like 6:30 in the morning. I had to be frantically messaging, and they ended up having massive groups, and it was a nightmare day. But I didn't want to do that to the others, and I wanted to kind of commit to the work that I'd done. But I also thought to myself, what if, God forbid, something takes a turn for the worse, and I'm there at like 8 in the morning? How do I show up to deliver? And it's really hard because we talk about the mindset, and we talk about, but we are humans, right? And so even though I know all the good stuff about how to de-stress, how to do this, when something big hits you, it can be hard to remember those things, and it can be hard to actually implement those things. Sometimes, I do have quite a lot of experience about going in and delivering in front of people, because it's a different kind of role where you're going in front of people, whether it's coaching or whether often I teach yoga as a part-time thing, right? And a lot of the time I go in and there's something going on in the world outside, in my world outside, which doesn't necessarily put me in the right frame of mind. But I always think to myself, look, these people, really on the face of it, they don't really care about that. They've come here for the yoga, and they want someone to kind of deliver. And so whatever it is that's going on, I have to park that. And actually, that's what I tell my students, right? Whatever's going on, just leave it at the door. And you can pick it up on the way out if you want, but just for the next hour, just park it at the door and have this time to kind of do that self-care, because it's so important for being able to cope with the things that are going on outside as well.
I think you raised an interesting point. I've just done an hour-long podcast on intrinsic motivation, which is kind of ironic when you're lacking a little bit of motivation because of stuff that's going on outside. But we get through. I've made a commitment, and I've got a service to provide to the listeners of that show, and it's great content that will help a lot of people. And there'll be no doubt people listening to this who are going through similar family struggles with loved ones that are unwell, or maybe there's levels of anxiety for different reasons, and they still have to show up in the same way. What I thought was interesting, you just mentioned then, Harry, and I know you really well, but you mentioned it twice, probably without even knowing, because it's so ingrained in the life that you live, right? But earlier you mentioned you were cutting vegetables in preparation for tomorrow, that, and then you said, it's about healthy mind. If you're healthy, you got all these things going on, but actually it's really important then to self-care, I think is the word you use, to have self-care and have a little bit of that. I'm not a big juicer necessarily like you are. We live our lives differently, but what I did do yesterday, just to help process what's going on in my mind and all the different thoughts and things, is I went for 3 hours, no, just shy. It was just over 2 hours, 15-minute cycle ride. Just me and my thoughts, just work hard, sweat it out, no distractions, just kind of, it's amazing how well the body can respond and the mind can respond if we give it a little bit of self-care, when actually it's quite challenging to do so. I feel so much better today having done that ride yesterday, just to clear everything that was going on.
It's easy to forget those things, and that's the problem, is that you're like, you're trying to fight these battles on half your fuel or less than half your fuel. And what you need is, to optimize, your nutrition, optimize your exercise and do that so that you're more resilient to be able to cope with those things. And it is tricky because like even tonight I've come back and I'm like, you know what, I haven't really, I mean, I've moved the body quite a lot today, to be fair. I don't know what my step count is. It's currently almost 20,000 steps today. So I've moved quite a bit, but I feel like I need something more structured, like some stretching or something before I go to bed, because I'm like, this is life, right? Because I've got the same day tomorrow. Wednesday's actually a little bit worse in a way, because I've got a whole day and then I'm coming back and doing a whole workshop in the evening as well. Thursday and Friday, I'm taking more of a rest day, so it's okay. But the reality is that sometimes, and I was looking on one of my magazines that I subscribed to, and it was talking about, I think it was talking about like active aging. And it was talking about how a lot of times, and people I meet as well, they'll say, I'll get fit and I'll get healthy when, right? When the kids are older, or when I'm retired, or when things are less busy. But the thing is, things are never less busy. I'm here today, and I'm rushing to my dad, and at the same time I've been down in Brighton the weekend looking for houses, and there was a house I liked, and I was like, right, now I've got to go and make an offer on this house to this people and try and do that on the way to the thing. And then I'll come back and do all the stuff, and things are always going to be busy. That's the thing. It's never going to let up. And so we have to work out ways, both mentally and physically, and in our habits and routines, that are going to help us cope with it when they're busy.
I mean, we're moving into funny enough, moving into the world of motivation, right? So you're talking about the when question. It's so prevalent. But if your motivation's strong enough, you'll make that step now. So what's the easiest way to run an ultra marathon? And for people who've never even got off their sofa, couch to 5K, people, they'll think, well, I could never do that. But the quickest way to run it is to take the first step. And that's it. Take the first step, then take the second step, then take the third step. You've got to start taking steps, whatever it is you want to achieve. And sometimes when you find that your loved ones, your family are unwell, there's a well-known saying, you can put things into perspective. And it's something, what are the things that you haven't done? There's a story that resonates with me that's really interesting. And I don't know why it's always stuck in my mind. It's never, ever gone away. And I don't know who it was that first said it. You may know the story. It's when it's imagine yourself on your own deathbed. So anyone listening to this now, I know we were talking about both our parents who have been unwell, but actually, let's imagine it was yourself on your deathbed and you're lying there and you got visited by all the ghosts. You might know this already. All the ghosts that come to visit you, all the things you never did. And that you only get visited by the ghosts of things you wanted to do but never did. So the book you never wrote comes to see you. The friend you never got back in touch with, the person you never said sorry to, whatever it is. And you've got to think about, okay, if you were to sadly find yourself on your deathbed, what ghost would come and visit you? And do you mind seeing them at that point? If they're a ghost you're happy to reflect with, and you don't have that feel of that nagging part of, I should have done something about it, that ghost will come and go. But if it's one of those ghosts, is something like, I really want to write a book and I never did it, I really wanted to enter that benefit, and that really holds some truth for you, then that's something that you need to act upon. You got to find that motivation to go and quell that ghost. So when you do end up on that deathbed, that ghost doesn't come and visit. So what are the ghosts that would come and visit you? If I throw that to you right now,
I mean,
very ambitious.
I've got an answer. Well, actually, my answer is not it's gonna be something that's a little bit different, because what you were talking about there, what jumped out at me all of a sudden is, so this is actually getting quite personal, actually. So, and maybe a little bit embarrassing as well. But anyway, when I've got a journal, right? This isn't the embarrassing part, but I've been writing a journal on and off since I was 10 years old, right? And sometimes I don't write in it for like 5-6 years. There were lots of entries when I was a teenager, because I feel like it's a troubling time for a lot of teenagers, which is why I relate a lot to teenagers. But I remember a while back, must have been about 10 years ago, I was reading, and in there I'd made a promise to myself to apologize to someone that it's a bit embarrassing. Like, I think when I was a kid, when I was like a teenager or early teens, I liked a girl, right? I fancied a girl, and I was quite shy, even though I didn't appear that way to most people at school. I felt like, I was the sports person, confident, whatever, but I was quite shy, so I never really approached her, right? Which really always annoyed me. But I did write her a letter, an anonymous letter, saying, I don't know really what I said in there, but I liked it. And then so I really wanted to apologize for that because I felt like, you know, maybe the letter wasn't so good, or maybe she felt uncomfortable with it or whatever. And we are connected on Facebook. So I actually did write to her. Like, this is, bear in mind, this is at least 20 years after this thing happened. But it was one of the things that I'd promised myself in my journal, that at some point I'm going to tell her that it was me. And that, so I wrote to her and I said, you know, you may have received this letter, you know, because I posted it by hand through her door because I knew where she lived and stuff. And then she just wrote back and said, like, you know what, I actually don't remember if I ever received a letter, but I'm sure if I did, I'm sure it was nothing but nice, and I feel flattered or whatever. And, you know, and there was this thing that I wanted to kind of, you know, one of my ghosts that I wanted to kind of make sure I'd done. So that's what jumped into my head when you were talking, actually. And actually I felt, you know, yeah, good for doing that. But I think it's an interesting exercise because you don't really reflect on that stuff. I do something similar with coaching clients where we do the kind of like, we call it the Dickens pattern. I think it's a Tony Robbins thing. I'm not sure if you come across the Dickens pattern, but it's very similar. It's really powerful.
I don't know it as a Dickens pattern if I have.
Yeah, so basically it's the whole, you know, Charles Dickens, Scrooge, Three Ghosts type thing. So, but it's not quite like that. So what you do, and he spends in UPW, Tony Robbins, the Unleash the Power Within seminar that he does, this 4-day seminar, about 3 hours doing it. And it's really powerful. I just maybe spend half an hour with clients doing it for obvious reasons. But you basically take person forward, and this goes back to the motivation thing, because we don't usually get motivated. We get motivated really through two things: inspiration or desperation. Desperation tends to be the stronger motivator than inspiration usually. But you take people from where they are down a journey, like, and they visualize themselves in like a year's time doing the habits that they've done, then 5 years time doing the habits they've done, and 10 and 50. And usually you start with the habits that are not getting them where they want to get to, which are the ones they want to change. And they are like totally, like, they feel it, right? Their body's heavier. Like, you really get into it. That's why it takes like a few hours to do this process. And then you take them all the way back, and then you take them forward, but doing the good habits, right? And normally I throw in a bit of extra stuff at the end. So I get them to, like, you know, see themselves in a mirror, like, as they're and then have that person have a conversation with them and tell them what they needed to do and how they needed to feel in order to get that. So it's actually a really powerful process. And that actually can be the motivating driver. And interestingly, that's what actually motivates me a lot of the time, is that I don't see myself, and this comes back to where you were talking about being like not on time and stuff. And I wanted to comment on that in a second, but I see myself, what does my future self want to see in me, right? What would, like, me now looking back 20 years, what would I wish I'd done then? And I kind of project that forward. So I say, would the person that I want to be in 5 years time be annoyed with me that I'm now like sitting on the couch watching Netflix and doing the gym?
I think that's a slightly different point. Probably maybe I mean, I understand why it relates to the point I made about the ghost, but I would put that in a box of purposeful. You know, a lot of people want to find purpose, right? There's an coaching exercise called the 5 whys. You say, you know, what's your why? Everyone knows about the why. You've got to have your why. Well, that's fine. You give me your why, and then I'll say, well, why that? And you go 5 levels deep. And maybe in another episode we'll do that with each other. Maybe not today because it's quite a long exercise to do, but it can be quite powerful. But I would say that it links to purpose and authenticity. So a good exercise, and if you're listening to this, it is an interesting one, and it can be quite challenging sometimes. But again, to put yourself on your deathbed, you just discovered, Harry, for example, you've just discovered you've got an illness that's going to be life-shortening, right? I don't know what that shortening period is, but the question is, what are the things you would immediately stop doing? Now, anything you are currently doing that you would stop when you discovered you had that kind of illness are typically the things that are inauthentic to what we do. That we're not living an authentic life. We're doing them for someone else. It could be for the approval of our parents. It could be for the approval of a boss. It could be for acceptance. It could be for a multitude of different things. But anything you immediately go, you know what, if I knew I was going to die tomorrow, I would immediately stop doing this. Well, that probably suggests you should stop doing it anyway. It doesn't speak to your values, doesn't speak to your purpose, doesn't speak to someone within you. And that's a useful thing. When we do this, I do this in the coaching clients that I work with, you know, when there's a whole load of questions you can ask. Well, one of them is what are things you immediately stop doing? And I think it's really interesting because if there's anything on that list that immediately stands out, and for some people it can be really powerful. It's an immediate answer. They don't even have to think about it. Yeah. And so, well, stop doing it. You know, to be authentic, you don't need to do that.
Have you watched the movie Joe versus the Volcano?
I haven't. It doesn't sound like my kind of movie. Is it a kids movie?
You know what? It's an old movie. I think like
All right.
early 80s. I only watched it about maybe 5 years ago. And the reason I watched it is because are you familiar with Les Brown, the
Nope.
motivational speaker? Oh,
No.
he's brilliant. I'll have to send you some audios, but
Do.
he is brilliant, right? And brilliant at storytelling. So anyway, he recounts the story of what Joe versus the Volcano as a movie is all about. And it stars Tom Hanks, right? And Tom Hanks is a bit like many people we may know, right? He goes to a job, he doesn't really like it. He just kind of punches in, does his work, punches out, whatever, goes home, comes back to work the next day, right? Very like day-to-day thing. And he's not really living his life, and he's not really enjoying himself, and he's, you know, and he's got all these things that are holding him back. And you know, there's a girl there that he works with that he really wants to ask out, and every day he wants to ask her out and never does, and all that. And he starts concocting that he's a bit ill and stuff. So he goes to the doctor, and the doctor says, you know, Joe, look, you've got a brain cloud, right? You've got a brain cloud, and you've only got 6 months left to live. And then that spurs him on. And by the way, Les Brown tells this story way better than me, but that spurs him on to like do all these things that he wanted to do, because this guy, I've got this brain cloud, and stuff. Now, if you haven't figured it out, the brain cloud is just a made up thing that the doctor has just said, right? And so he thinks he's gonna die. So he you know, he asks out that girl, he withdraws his money, goes traveling or something. I can't remember. I think the girl might say no to him or something, but then
He starts living an authentic life, essentially.
Lives authentic. And actually he finds this other girl who actually is the same actress, but it's like the same version of her, but just somewhere. And anyway, he travels to this remote island, and in order for the island to not kill all the inhabitants for some reason, there's this weird volcano, and you have to sacrifice yourself or something like that to kind of stop the inhabitants from dying. And I won't spoil the story. I mean, it's a funny little movie. It's not the, like, you know, gonna win any Oscars, but
Probably a reason I've never heard of it.
yeah, and
I get the premise.
Watch it. But Les Brown's story on it is so funny. But it goes back to this idea: is like, what would you do, like, if you knew you only had 6 months left to live, right? Who would you speak to, right? Who would you apologize to? Who would you reconnect with? Where would you travel to? What would you do? And it's really a scary thought.
It is. I mean, it does link to
really.
It links. Two things have popped to mind. One thing I meant to mention earlier, actually, I'm going to go back slightly and I'll come back, bring it forward again. One was when you talked about that letter. Two memories. One is a really embarrassing story which has no relevance to this conversation whatsoever. I'm going to mention it anyway because it's popped into my head, and they never know, they may listen to this in the future. When it comes to girlfriends, I'm the opposite. I was always quite confident. I was never afraid of going up to girls and asking them out. First girl I ever asked out, her name was Karen Walker. I was at secondary school. I was 11 years old. So I think my secondary school friends might listen to this may or may not know this story. I phoned her up and asked her out on the phone, and she said no. And I was like, most people would be gutted, right? They'd be a bit embarrassed. All I did is went, can I have your best friend's number, Michelle? And she went, yeah, of course you can. I hung up, called Michelle, and Michelle said yes, Michelle Block, who happens to be Karen's best mate. And I ended up, my first ever girlfriend at school was Michelle, after Karen rejected me. So it's slightly different. Wow. Fortunately, I have not written a letter. I don't intend to, but anyway, no relevance to the conversation. And it stuck in my mind. What did stick in my mind with the letter thing is, we lose so much of our lives to social. We're just going on a slightly different tangent. I am going to bring it back, but just because if people are listening to this, they may find this useful. And I imagine, what time is it now? We're recording this at 8:10 in the evening. This is the time when people start losing their lives away from their families by delving into social media and just losing themselves on Facebook, Twitter, and anything else. So I would give everyone who's listening to this now a little bit of a challenge. Swap your social media for one day. You won't miss anything. I promise you, the FOMO you will survive this moment, even if the ghost will not come to visit you from Facebook. If if something happens to you tonight and you don't respond, and swap that time for a text or a call, or ideally a phone call, with someone who's in your phone book who means a lot to you, that you haven't spoken to for longer than you know you should have done. And just for one day, stop that half an hour of social media browsing and pick up the phone or text that really important person in your life. Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a friend, and just reach out to them, because we never do it and we lose ourselves. And then before we know it, months have passed or years have passed and we haven't reconnected. And connection is so important in life anyway. And it becomes really powerful when you suddenly find someone's ill, like our parents. Now, to link this back to where I was going on the dying side, which is, I don't even know how we've got here, but I guess both our parents have been incredibly unwell in hospital. Typically, there are 5 regrets, and you might know this anyway when it comes to dying. One is the most the biggest one is I wish I hadn't worked so hard. And I think this links to authenticity as well. Second is I wish I had the courage to live a life that was true to myself. And that links to the authenticity piece even more, not the life that others expected of me. And often that's related to parental approval, actually. It's really interesting. If you say, what would you do? Anyone listening to this now, ask yourself the question, what would I do if I didn't need parental approval to do it? For some, that'll really strike a chord.
And actually, just before you go to the next three, with the parental approval, just to throw it in there, a lot of the time that parental approval is actually, it's nothing that's stated. We've imagined that our parents want us to become this or want us to
100%,
do this. And it's 100%. Just made up a lot of the time in our own head. Because that's just happening.
Yeah, it's a good point, because actually parents would be devastated if they thought you were making those choices.
Every parent really ultimately wants their child to be happy, right? Sure. Happy and safe and successful, whatever. Not, doctor, whatever. Although some cultures are like, there's only like three professions or 4 professions we can do. It's like doctor, lawyer, accountant, or doctor, lawyer, accountant, or disappointment, right? That's
exceptions to every rule.
That's the 4. But yeah, carry on. So you got
that's right. And the third one is, which links to some things we both said, and fair play for you for putting that letter through the door, which I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. And sometimes it's too late. I wish I'd just told her that or done that. Another one, which is linked to the messaging I thought, which again, you put this thought in my head with the letter again, but actually tonight, if anyone could just take the opportunity to swap social media for getting in touch with someone, is I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends.
Yeah,
we lose touch with our friends. And the last one, and this is a permission-based one, which will link to a lot of the work you've done and you've authored as well, talking about the Thought Gym, your book, which is a fantastic book for those that haven't caught it. You can get it in the show notes. But it's I wish I'd let myself be happier.
Yeah.
We don't give ourselves permission sometimes to be happy. Both of us, at the minute, got parents who are very, very sick. That doesn't mean we're not able to be happy at the same time. You can be empathetic, you can be emotional, you can be, you can almost be sad and happy about 2 different things. Our mind is complex. We don't have to be anything. It doesn't have to be binary.
And we were being very positive as well today. And actually, I've left my dad. I've hooked up Netflix and some other things on his phone, because he's just got his phone. Fortunately, he hasn't got his headphones with him, but and putting on comedy, because like comedy is really important. And a lot of what you've just been speaking about, I actually have written about in this last book. From I mentioned Norman Cousins. I can't remember. He's famous for something. I can't remember, but he kind of famously cured himself from like some disease, in part a lot from just he spent 8 hours a day watching comedies and stuff. Because when you laugh, you're creating all these different hormones in your body that's going to help with your healing process as well.
Absolutely,
and with stress, it's totally the opposite. So I was like saying to my dad, look, watch some comedy. I said to my mum when she dropped me off, I was like, go home and watch something funny, because you've been running about and stuff. And I do the same. If you've got kids, it's usually, well, if you're not tearing your hair out with them, it can be quite easy to laugh and have joy with them quite a lot of the time. I don't have children, so I kind of default to watching comedy a lot of the time to laugh and have fun. But the regrets of the dying. I think I wrote a blog post about it a few years ago, and I really feel like with the first one about not spending so much time at work, I feel like that won't be one of my regrets, because I don't feel like, I think you work really hard. You work really hard. My parents will say I work really hard, but I don't know that I do really. I'm not sure. I think I do. Maybe there's a difference between like when you enjoy what you do, maybe it doesn't feel like work, but I don't feel like I'm doing it at the expense of relationships a lot of the time. Because I think I got early on, I was never really super invested in my career, because I just felt, does it really matter?
For those who may have listened to the first episode, in case you're just joining this episode for the first time, let's be fair, you've taken that risk, that challenge that most of the population, I think, would love to take and haven't had the courage to do so, which was you were walking down a wet, rainy street and you went, I don't want to do this anymore. I am living an authentic life, essentially. This isn't what I'm passionate about. You're working in the city, and you quit the city life in London to follow your dream of healthy living, healthy mind, coaching, helping others.
That's what's more important, right? And one of the things I did with so actually I'm going to come back to that in a second, but the other thing you talked about was connection, and they wish not lost touch with friends, and that's a big part of what I talk about. And we won't go into the beat model now, but within the connection, within the activity part of my beat model is connection, right? And it's actually the biggest indicator of longevity, right? From the Gantt study, which is like this 80-year study out of Harvard University. They followed people for 80 years, different generations now as well. And the biggest indicator of being healthy at 80, when they looked at them at 50, was not like blood pressure, whether they got diabetes, heart disease, anything like that. It's the strength of those relationships that they had at 50 determined how well they were going to be at 80. And I've always stuck with that because one of the things I haven't quit on, I've quit on loads of things, martial arts, music, sports, but I haven't quit on my friends. And I've still got friends now that I had from 6 years old, from primary school. And we're still quite close. And I've got other friends as well that I'm close with it. And one of the things that has upset me a little bit in the last several years, as people go off and, you know, have families and, you know, do move to different parts, is that we're not as strongly connected as we once were. And then now with social media and COVID, it's made it worse. And I look at some of my friends and their families, their parents, they all came over. There's a group that came over from India in the 60s. And they're still friends. They're going on holiday together, and they've got more social life than us in our 40s and when we were in our 30s. And I've always envied that. And I've been like adopted by them to some degree and went to like their weddings in India and all sorts of things, and their renewal of their vows and all that sort of stuff. And I was like, I miss that, because those friends that I've got, we've drifted apart a little bit, because I put a lot into relationships, but then sometimes when you don't get stuff back, you kind of just let it go.
Generally, I mean, you and I, we meet face to face once a year. We never met each other before. We met on a cycle trip. For those listening to the first episode, I won't go through it again. Check out episode 1 to find out how that all happened, how we came together. But we don't see a huge amount of each other face to face, but we're able to pick up where we left off every time that we do, which is lovely. Really interested though, only because I've known you for 10 plus years. I don't think I've ever heard you use the word the envious of someone else, because I would say that kind of contradicts positive mindset thinking here. We don't want to have envy. We don't want to look across the fence and go, I wish I had that, I could have that, I want that. We've got to create it for ourselves. It's not something, and I understand envy can hit all of us. It's not something that I typically think I feel too often in my world. I usually think in my own control.
How you understand envy to mean in a word like, is like there's envy in terms of like an admiration envy, I think is what I mean, right? Where I'm like, you know, seeking that kind of relationship, as opposed to being envious and wishing bad on that person that's got that thing.
Yeah, I understand. It was just an interesting use of
yeah.
You know, I like looking at language and listening.
I think I looked at other people, and although I always say, you know, it's not good to compare, but the reality is, like, you run a business as well. You've got to focus on your stuff, but you also want to know what competitors are doing or what the market's doing. And so you're always going to be comparing to some degree your situation with other people. And this is where social media is so bad, because I
generally don't. I've got to cover it. I generally don't.
Okay,
I'm a big believer. I'll say this to my family all the time. Comparison is the stealer of all joy. I do not look at my competitors. I generally don't know what they're doing. I
stopped following a bunch of people that I maybe know from I actually don't go on social media much these days, but you know, when I was realizing, when I find out about this person's life, I feel worse, right, in a way, because I'm like, suddenly you were like, oh, you know, I want this, or you know, they're doing so much better, and you know, at the end of the day, I'm like, you've got to live your life. And now it's good to kind of have comparisons or look at other people, because it can motivate, right? That's the thing, it can motivate you as well. You say, right, okay, I want to do this stuff. And I actually want to come back to motivation in a second, and actually why I think we need to go a step sideways on that. But for me, sometimes when I'm comparing myself to others, because I do it, right? I'm going to be honest, right? I compare myself to others all the time. Well, not all the time. I'm also very secure and happy in myself, which is why I can cope that. But I also think when I compare myself too much, especially on social media, where it's an unfair comparison, because it's like, you know, you're looking at their tip of their iceberg and not what's beneath.
What's underneath the water.
Yeah. So it's very unrealistic, but it can motivate, but it can also make you demotivate.
I mean, look, I would be lying if I said I never use comparison in anything that I do, because I mean, surely if we, you know, in what I do in terms of business, if we see a downturn, well, I want to know if my competitors are having a downturn as well. Is it just because we're doing something wrong, or is it a market a market movement. So of
But
course we are.
you're also comparing yourself to, like, in all your sports and all your run-ins, you're completely comparing, other than that race that we talked about in episode 1, where you were running for yourself and you weren't thinking about the time, but you're always comparing yourself to your other time or to other people or whatever it might be.
I've definitely compared to my own times and my own performance, and I can get frustrated. But ultimately, there's an honesty there. I've got to look at myself and go, have I put the same amount of work in? Do I deserve that result? Have I been as committed? I think, yeah, of course, like I'm human, but ultimately usually if there's a problem there, I'm not performing, it's down to me, and I can try and seek solace elsewhere, but it's usually down to the fact I haven't worked as hard, haven't been as motivated, I haven't got my nutrition right, or if we're talking about exercise related things. And it's, if we can bring it back to the genuine reasons why we're not performing, so easy to blame elsewhere, to be envious, to look and go, well, and social media is a great point. We look at Instagram and we see our friends sometimes have moved abroad, living the best life, but you only ever show the best version of yourself online.
And it's a real big problem. I mean, I work a lot with teenagers. Your eldest is, I guess, becoming 13. A teenager. Yeah, she's a teenager now, right? And I remember she was like, I guess she would have been just literally 1 or less than 1.
Yeah.
And but I deal with 14 and 15-year-olds a lot, sometimes 12, 13, 14-year-olds as well, 12 and 13-year-olds. But the whole social media stuff, the whole comparison thing, and they know the problem, and they know the going back to that lack of connection, and put the phone down and call someone, like you mentioned before, for the listeners to do. They want to do that as well, and they just they write speeches about it all the time, and they're stuck in this way at the moment a lot of the time, and they want to get out of it, and I think we all do, and it's a real problem. I do want to come back to motivation though, because I said I was going to sidestep and
go for it.
Where we were talking
Take us
about
back.
Where we were talking about me doing all the vegetables and all this sort of stuff. A lot of this is not necessarily motivation, and I would say whether it's discipline or not, I don't know if it's discipline as well. A lot of people say I'm quite disciplined. I would argue that discipline and motivation are great. Okay, they're great. They just don't last. And so, like, eating food doesn't last. You have to constantly be like up in there. And what does last is the habits and routines usually. And so the discipline and the motivation is there, from my view, to get you to those habits and routines so that it becomes automated. So a lot of the things that I do that people say I'm disciplined by, I feel as though they're just habitual now a lot of the time. But I do think discipline is important. I was talking to my 9-year-old niece about it yesterday, because she was doing all the spelling with the SC words, like scent and dissent, and discipline was one of those words. And I was asking her, what does discipline mean? And I can't remember if she knew or not exactly. And it came up today in one of my speeches, and he was talking about disciples and followers and stuff like that. I think discipline for me is doing the things you need to do at the time you need to do it, whether you want to do it or not. That for me is what discipline is. And a lot of the time, I don't often want to do the things I've got to do, but I do them anyway, at least in the beginning, to build that habit. Now that I've built that habit of, say, chopping my veg the night before, because it's actually easier for me to do than, because in the morning, I know what will happen in the morning. In the morning, I want to sleep in until as late as possible, and I'll try and shortcut in different areas what I can do. Then I'll be in a rush, then I'll be stressed, and tomorrow I have to get to the school really early, because if I get there after 8, you get fined because of the traffics and stuff. So I'm like, I don't have any time. So tomorrow I need to be on it. And so everything needs to be ready. You need to put as little barrier as possible. Right now, and it's taken me about 11 or 10 years of smoothie making to figure this out. But usually what I used to do with my smoothies, I've got all my containers. I have about 30 different powders and potions and things that go into it. So I put it all in each day. Only about 6 months ago, and it was only through necessity, because I was getting up so early all the time, and I was thinking, I need to have a better strategy, because it's not going to work to do this. And I just bought like 8 tiny little Tupperware containers, and every 8 days or so, I put all the nuts. I just back it all up. It's in the fridge. All I have to do in the morning now is I drain the veg, I tip that in. I can pretty much do it with my eyes closed. And what I actually do is try and stack things, so I won't have time to meditate in front of my infrared light. So what I do now is I just put my infrared light stacked where I'm doing the juicing, so that I get that light on my face in the morning.
And you also bring it back full circle. You very kindly and caringly, you're creating those juices for your dad as well, because hospital food is probably not
Yeah.
the most nutritious in terms of what he's getting. You want to look after his health. You want to keep him positive health, positive mind, positive nutrition, positive mind. So it's good. It's
I've even given him a meditation tonight to listen to. I don't know if he will. He did when he was in hospital about 4 or 5 years ago for an operation, and he put this meditation on. It's one of my favorite go-tos at the moment. It's Jerry and Esther Hicks Getting into the Vortex meditation, and it's 15 minutes long, and it's got a nice 4-count beat. So you breathe in for 4 and out for 4, and she talks, and it's all about how the body can heal itself from anything and blah blah blah. Whether or not you choose to believe that, it's kind of irrelevant. But if you go on that path and believe that, you're going to be in a better position anyway.
So send me the link, and I'll put it into the show notes. So listeners,
it's not really a link because I it's not like an online. So I bought the CD and I've just downloaded.
Okay.
So, but people can look it up. Maybe we can find it as a link to buy that thing.
Sure.
But anyway, so I put that on, and I remember when he was listening to it a few years ago when he was at UCH hospital, and he had his headphones on, he's listening to it, and one of the orderlies came around and was like, what are you listening to? And he was listening to it a little bit as well, or the nurse, and they were like, oh yeah, this is good stuff. Actually, more people should be doing that, because when you're ill, if you breathe well and if you relax and you're going to heal better as well, right? You're going to aid recovery that you've got. So hopefully he's going to listen to it tomorrow. I'm not sure if he's going to do that or not. He's like, well, I wasn't really interested in it. And I was like,
slightly different situation for my dad, sadly, because he's got a cancer that's not curable, but hopefully he'll be with us for many, for a long time, but we don't know. And doctors don't really give you time frames. You just know it's not curable. But I'm the one in the family. I'll always try and put a positive spin on anything. I believe there's positives in every negative situation, right? Always. I'm trying to find them. I sent my dad a parable, which is one of my favorites, which is about the you might know the farmer and the plow parable, which is, I quite like it. Anyways, I said it to him to say, because he was getting back pain. So he's having this back pain. He's had the cancer for a couple of years now, and PSA's up and things like that. But he had this back pain. So he had the back pain scanned. And when they scanned it, of course, they found that the cancer had gone into his spine. So obviously rushed into Stamford ambulance and checking it. But the reality is, without the back pain, without that signal, he may not have had that scan. If it hadn't gone in, he wouldn't have discovered the cancer had spread. So obviously you've got to look at this with it's a horrible situation to be in, but a positive mindset. So if you hadn't complained, you wouldn't know it had spread. Now they can treat it. Now we can have you for a bit longer. If you'd left there and hadn't gone in, who knows? It may have spread. You may end up paralyzed. It may have hit your spinal cord, whatever. We just don't know the answers. What we do know is what you've done, the decisions you've taken. So I sent him the parable about the farmer. I love parables, and you'll probably get a few of these as we do more shows, because there's various ones I call upon in different situations. But this is one about a Chinese farmer who had a horse that pulls a plow. And the horse pulls a plow through the field, and the other farmers would come around and go, "Oh, Mr. Farmer, you're so lucky to have a horse that can pull your plow through the field. You're so lucky." The farmer says, "Maybe I am, maybe I'm not." Anyway, the following day, the horse breaks free of the field and runs away, and the farmers turn up and say, "Oh, you've lost your horse. You're so unlucky." He says, "Maybe I am, maybe I'm not." And the following day, the horse returns with 7 other wild horses. And he's now got 7 horses for his farm, pulling the plows up and down. The farmers come back and go, "Oh, he came back with 7 horses. You're so lucky." He says, "Maybe I am, maybe I'm not." Anyway, his son starts to tame these wild horses, and he a few months pass, and he's riding the horse, and one day the son falls off and breaks his leg, and it's in terrible pain. And the farmers come back and go, "Oh, if he only hadn't ridden those horses. He's so unlucky." He says, "Maybe he is, maybe he's not." Anyway, a week later, the Chinese army come round to conscript all the young adults into the army to fight a war, and he doesn't get conscripted because he has a broken leg and he's unable to fight. And the farmers say, "Ah, you're so lucky." And he says, "Maybe I am, maybe I'm not." And I just said that to my dad to say, "Look, I know this is incurable, right? We get that, but you've gone in, they found something we didn't know. You're not going to be, hopefully they've zapped it with the radiotherapy, which hopefully he's gone well this week, and he's been released now. He's out of hospital. So you can start looking forward to the things that we are celebrating. We can keep defying the odds. We can keep pushing forward. We can stay positive, because you said positive mindset when it comes to healing the body. Now, this may be incurable, but you can heal in different ways, and you can stay healthy for as long as possible. You can let the pain take you, or you can try and fight it with goals and objectives. And he's got so many goals that he's still aiming for. Focus on those. Focus on the positives. Be thankful that we found this early. Be thankful the radiotherapy hopefully has done its job. And you're back home now with mum, and let's keep looking forward, which is crazy with the amount of, because there's a lot of mental energy that goes into worrying about my dad or other things. But I want to be positive, I want him to think positive, and
absolutely. Yeah. It's tough. I mean, I absolutely love that parable. By the way, I'm familiar with it, and I use it sometimes as well. And ultimately what that really also like means to me, and I say this to a lot of the students that I work with, is nothing means anything in life except for the meaning you choose to give it.
Yeah,
Right?
nice.
Nothing means anything except for the meaning you choose to give it. And this is unfortunately or fortunately the reality. And I say to them, like, one of my pedantic examples is like, if I'm driving a car at 30 miles an hour, does that mean I'm going fast or slow? And some people will say fast, some people will say slow. And I say, well, the reality is the answer to every question in the universe in reality is it depends, right? So if I'm doing 30 miles an hour in the school playground at break time, it's probably quite fast. If I'm doing 30 miles an hour on the fast lane of the motorway, it's probably quite slow. The car is just saying you're traveling at 30 miles an hour. I've given it meaning based on
Context, yeah.
well, variety of circumstances. So like, you know, when my best mate, who he had a heart attack when he was 33 years old. And, you know, we can kind of argue and say, well, what does it all mean, right? You know, does it mean he was a doctor, actually, by the way, worked hard, played hard, never quit, all right? What does it mean, right? Well, does it mean, you know, you should change your ways and wake up, or does it mean you know, you work harder because you haven't got much time left or whatever? He took the second meaning. I would have taken the first meaning. It was like, oh, you know, maybe change career, do what you really wanted to do, and this, that, and the other. And he's like, no, I just thought, oh, I haven't got much time now. I'm going to do everything. I'm like, okay. So, but the reality is, you know, it doesn't really mean anything except for what you choose to mean it, right? Why did he have that heart attack? Well, it could be because he didn't really ever cook food. It could be because of this, but it doesn't really matter in the end, because you can choose, okay, what it meant was that I need to wake up, I need to change my life, but you choose. So like with your dad, it's like, okay, we found this, and like, you had this pain, now we know this thing, and actually we would never have known that had you not had this pain.
Sure.
Like same situation I had with my dad, actually. The paramedics came yesterday, and they came on Saturday, actually, and then we didn't put him in because his oxygen was low, but I was like, I think it's been low for a while, actually, so I think that's his natural way. So they were like, okay, fine. But then it was still low the next day, and it was getting a bit lower, and then the paramedics came again, different paramedics, and they kind of felt like a lump underneath his thing or something, which may have progressed from before. Maybe the paramedics before didn't spot it, or he was awkwardly in bed, and then they were like, no, we should take him in and stuff. And you know, he has been quite tired for months, right? Falling asleep a lot more. And I just thought it was a bit of old age and he's not moving his body enough and all this. But actually, it might be that he's had this virus for like weeks now or longer.
Yeah.
And plowing through. And had we not done this thing, they wouldn't have done this. Now, you know, he's a bit more alert and everything. And so you could say, oh, yeah, it means I should have acted quicker or whatever. Or it means, well, at least we acted, right? And we did something, you know. And it's everything in life. I mean, it sounds really simple to say nothing has any meaning except for the meaning you give it, and you can be quite pedantic with it and say, is that really true? But I really believe that to be true. Like, if I, like, when I bust my knee, I bust it a day before I was due to go to India for a month to go and do like yoga for a month, all right? And I bust it the day before. And I thought, does this mean that my trip is ruined and I can't do what I wanted to do and all that? Or does it mean that actually my body's now forced me to kind of slow down and work on my book? And rather than travel from place to place to place for the next month, I'm going to just stay in one or two places. And also it gave me the opportunity to try different sorts of activities. So I did like weird shaking exercises. I did Kundalini yoga because I didn't have to do.
It's a good example of a creative mindset, though. Like,
yeah.
I'm conscious of time. We don't want to take the listeners on too much of a journey today.
Talk too long. Yeah.
There's something called a reported mindset.
I do want to recommend a book.
Mindset and a creative mindset. And there's I'll maybe I'll give you a little quick story to finish, and you can comment on it at the end if you've got time. I think maybe just to give the listeners a bit of a rest from all the things we've gone through. There's been a lot of content, and we've gone through emotional things and various elements. But your example then for me is a great example of a creative mindset. So you didn't let the problem cause you to take a reported route, which is, I have a bad leg, I cannot do X. Instead is, I'm now going to use a creative mindset to do something and find opportunity where others may not see one. There's another story where a shoemaker, says to his two sons, go away to there's another country, there's a third world country who go away. Let's say I don't know where that is, but we'll make a fictional place in mind. I can't remember exactly the exact story. But he sends his two sons away, and the first son to the same country. And when they both land, they leave their wives and their children at home. The first son lands, and he says, he looks around and he realizes he's a shoemaker, and no one around him wears shoes. No one. They're all in bare feet. And he calls back to his wife and he says, it's been a total waste of time. I've flown all this way. But he said, I'm going to be back in the next couple of days. He said, everyone here is in bare feet. He said, you know, I'm a shoemaker. It's a waste of my time. I'm on the next flight home, and flies home. The second brother, who arrives in the country, looks around, sees everyone in bare feet, calls his wife and says, no one here wears shoes. Pack your bags, come over. We're going to make our fortunes. It's exactly the same circumstance. How we look at it, we can, yeah, one has a reported mindset. It's a bit like podcasts, right? People don't do podcasts. They go, well, because there's so many out there. It's already been done. I've missed the boat. If you've got something to say, say it.
The market, right? If people are listening to podcasts, right? You know, that's the thing. And I did want to, I think I mentioned it as a topic to talk about in the future, but it's I mean, it's not a huge topic in itself, but it's all about what I call the power of how. Right, and so we can talk about that another time in more detail, but that's what it's really reflecting. But what I will also maybe suggest is, because we're going to do some book reviews as well at some point.
Yeah.
So I think one of the ones on the list for me that I suggested is Mind Over Medicine. So we'll have to do that at some point, because that'll be an interesting one with Lissa Rankin, Dr. Lissa Rankin, who. But really, really, really interesting book. I think if you read it, you'll find it fascinating. So we'll
stay tuned to these episodes. Well, I've got something to say. We've got book reviews coming. Got some gadget reviews. You probably heard that Harry in particular here has got red light therapy going on.
Yeah, my dad was using the other day. So
got my back rocker, which is next to me here. We've got loads of little things going to be featuring. Good, you know, we're trialing these things, we're testing these things, so we'll bring those to the show as well in due course. But yeah, look, really, really good to meet you, Harry. Thank you for waiting on for me, although I was late. I'm sure
it's good, and conversations with you bring me energy anyway, and so that's the difference as well. So I was like, you know what, I need that change of dynamic this evening compared to what the day's been like. So yeah, it's been good, worth it.
I always enjoy chatting to you, Harry. The thing is, we could literally chat for hours, but I think we need to give our listeners a little break for today. We'll bring up the next episode real soon, and you know, they can just listen to all of them in one go, and you know, we'll keep them coming. But yeah, really good to catch up with you. I do hope your dad is, you know,
likewise, you know.
And yeah, I'll look forward to catching up with you again in a week's time, buddy.
All right, and take care, listeners.
Take care. Bye-bye.